Imagine having everything the world can offer. Wealth, fame, power, a perfect life. What do you do with it all? Throw it away. Trade wealth for poverty, fame for anonymity, all for a calling of faith. And what comes next? A life marked by supernatural trials, miracles that would convert even the most skeptical, and choices that redefined what it means to be a true follower of God. What he lived through was so extraordinary that even today we ask ourselves, what happens when someone abandons everything and follows without looking back a divine calling? This is the story of Saint Anthony of Padua. Fernando Martins de Bulhões was born in 1195 in the vibrant city of Lisbon, Portugal. He came into the world under the roof of a noble and deeply religious family, surrounded from an early age by solid principles of faith and duty. His father, a knight who served at the king's court, and his mother, a devout woman, instilled in Fernando not only the privilege of formal education, but also a strong sense of Christian responsibility. The home where he grew up was a place where faith and tradition walked hand in hand, shaping a boy of gentle heart but firm spiritual convictions. Fernando's parents, Martinho de Bulhões and Teresa Tavera, were respected figures in Lisbon, and Fernando's education was rigorous from childhood. Even as a boy, Fernando displayed a sharp intellect and an insatiable curiosity about the scriptures and the stories of the saints. His days were filled with the rigorous study of letters and Christian doctrine, and with every new lesson, his desire for a life of greater purpose intensified. At the age of 15, with a maturity uncommon for his age, Fernando made a choice that would define his trajectory. Feeling God's call stronger than the expectations of his noble life, he decided to join the order of the Canons Regular of St. Augustine. Leaving behind the luxury of nobility and the promise of a life of prestige, Fernando opted for a life of prayer, study, and rigorous discipline. He began his monastic life at the monastery of São Vicente de Fora in Lisbon, a place where faith and learning were deeply respected. However, despite his dedication to studies and the routine of prayer, Fernando often felt distracted by the proximity of his former life and the frequent visits of friends and relatives. This closeness distanced him from his goal of a more isolated and contemplative life. Recognizing his need for a more secluded environment conducive to prayer, he requested a transfer to the monastery of Santa Cruz in Coimbra. The monastery of Santa Cruz in Coimbra was not just a spiritual refuge, it was the intellectual heart of Portugal, where monks and scholars gathered to preserve and deepen theological and philosophical knowledge. Fernando knew that there he would have access to the greatest minds of his time, and it was with this desire for spiritual and intellectual growth that he embraced this new phase of his life. However, even in the most favorable environment for his formation, something still seemed missing. Although recognized for his intelligence and fervor, Fernando felt that theoretical knowledge was not enough to fill the longing in his heart. In Coimbra, he dedicated himself even more intensely to the study of scriptures and philosophy, earning the respect of his religious peers and masters for his intelligence and fervor. Yet Fernando felt that theoretical knowledge still fell short. He yearned for a more active and meaningful service. With a restless spirit, Fernando soon realized that his true mission lay beyond the monastery walls. He did not want to be merely a scholarly monk. He wanted to be a bearer of God's word to those who were lost. This desire consumed him, and he knew it was something greater than himself. His mission would not be fulfilled within the monastery walls. He was about to take a step that would change his life and the lives of thousands of others forever. It was in the year 1220, when Coimbra seemed enveloped in profound silence, that a transformative event altered the course of Fernando's life. That morning, the city was overtaken by a moment of great solemnity, something that, for him, would be the starting point of a new journey. Everyone in the city gathered for an event of great importance, a procession carrying profound significance. It was a slow and deeply emotional procession, as it bore the bodies of 5 Franciscans who had been martyred in Morocco. It was a powerful scene, marked by sorrow and reverence that touched the hearts of all, especially that of a young man observing everything with eyes full of new determination. Fernando. The streets of Coimbra, usually lively and noisy, turned into a sea of silence and tears, except for Anthony. As the crowd pressed closer, trying to catch a glimpse of the remains of the first Franciscan martyrs, Fernando watched intently. His gaze was fixed on the simple yet sacred coffins. Something awoke within him. His heart burned with an intense mix of pain and admiration, but also with a deep and uncontrollable yearning for something greater, something that would make him transcend his own existence and dedicate his life to a cause greater than himself. And it was at that moment that an irresistible desire was born. He wanted to follow in the footsteps of those martyrs, dedicating himself body and soul to this mission, even if it led to the ultimate sacrifice. In a decision that surprised everyone, Fernando left the safety of the monastery of Santa Cruz and knocked on the door of the small and humble chapel of St. Anthony in Lisbon. The contrast was immense. From the grand libraries and opulent corridors, he now stood before a life of radical simplicity. There, in a touching ceremony, he withdrew for a moment of profound prayer. Inspired by his devotion to the hermit saint, St. Anthony of the Desert, and his desire to renounce his former self, Fernando decided to change his name. He left behind the name Fernando de Bulhões and, in homage to the saint who symbolized a life of self-denial, became Friar Anthony. His new Franciscan brothers welcomed him with joy, impressed by the fervor and determination of this young nobleman who chose poverty. After deciding to leave the Augustinian monastic life and follow in the footsteps of the Franciscan martyrs, Anthony traveled to Assisi, where the humility and devotion that enveloped the small town deeply moved his soul. Once an heir to a life full of privileges, he completely surrendered to the divine calling, determined to embrace poverty and serve others with devotion. In Assisi, Anthony had the opportunity to meet St. Francis personally, the man whose radical faith inflamed hearts. The encounter was transformative. In Francis' presence, Anthony could feel the true essence of absolute commitment to God. With his living humility, St. Francis not only preached charity and faith, but lived a total surrender, a renunciation for the love of Christ that transcended words. At that moment, Anthony understood that his decision was not merely a desire inspired by the martyrs, but the answer to his calling, a total commitment to the mission of serving God and others. With a heart burning with missionary zeal, Anthony did not hesitate to take the next step. He set out for Morocco, determined to follow in the footsteps of those martyrs who had inspired him so much. His superiors, recognizing his determination and intellectual preparation, granted permission. His dream was clear: to preach the gospel or die trying, like those 5 Franciscans whose relics had changed his life. The journey was difficult, but his spirit was filled with hope and courage. In African lands, he found a hostile and challenging environment, but divine plans are mysterious, and a severe illness struck him, sapping his strength and frustrating his plans for martyrdom. High fever and extreme weakness prevented him from fulfilling his missionary dream. Debilitated and feverish, Anthony was forced to accept the inevitable. He needed to return to Portugal. What seemed like a total failure of his mission, however, was about to turn into something extraordinary. But while Fernando was still recovering from his fever, fate was preparing a surprise for him. In 1221, as he traveled back to Portugal, a violent and unforeseen storm struck his ship. The sky suddenly darkened, and the giant waves seemed ready to swallow the boat. Each lightning bolt felt like an omen of doom, but as if something greater were at play, the storm did not sink the ship. On the contrary, it pushed it away from the coast, throwing it directly onto Sicily. However, this was far from the end. It was the beginning of something unexpected, a radical change that no one could have foreseen, the land where his true mission awaited him. Italy, the birthplace of the Franciscan movement, would be the stage where this discreet and seemingly failed Portuguese man would reveal himself as one of the greatest preachers in the Church's history. There, his skills as an orator, his profound knowledge of the scriptures, and his ardent love for the truth would find fertile ground to flourish. With a humility that captivated and a passion that ignited hearts, Anthony embraced the itinerant ministry of preaching. He did not stay in one place for long. His words echoed through villages and cities, reaching nobles and the poor, the faithful and sinners alike. When St. Anthony opened his mouth to preach, his words came forth with an almost tangible force, as if heavenly truth itself was taking shape in the air. Every sentence he spoke fell upon hearts like rain on parched soil, penetrating hardened souls, revealing human weaknesses and awakening genuine repentance. People flocked to him, their eyes filled with emotion and their hearts aflame, as if God himself were speaking through him. With every sermon, he unveiled the truths of the Christian faith with clarity and fervor, defending the oppressed and confronting those who strayed from God's path. Among the many stories surrounding Anthony's ministry, one of the most remarkable occurred in Rimini, a city in northern Italy where he faced great resistance and skepticism. A group of heretics openly challenged the Christian faith, denying the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. With unshakable fervor, Anthony accepted the challenge to prove divine power in a way no one could deny. The confrontation became a public event. Anthony and the leader of the heretics agreed on an unusual test. It would involve a mule, an animal typically used for heavy labor, and would be conducted in the city's central square. For 3 days, the mule would be kept without food in a strict fast. The tension among Rimini's inhabitants grew as they awaited the outcome. At the appointed time, Anthony approached, holding the Eucharist, the Blessed Sacrament, and called the animal with a firm voice, saying, "If this is the body of Christ, kneel." To everyone's astonishment, the mule ignored the bucket of food, and in a gesture that seemed beyond human reason, slowly bent its front legs and knelt before the Eucharist. Silence fell over the crowd as they watched, awestruck by the miracle unfolding before their eyes. Mouths opened in surprise, but soon the silence was broken by cries of praise. Many who had doubted converted at that very moment, deeply moved by the evidence of divine power. Men and women with tears in their eyes knelt down, not only in reverence for the miracle, but also for the transformation they felt within their own hearts. That scene sparked a collective spiritual renewal in the city. Faith was reignited with such intensity that it reached even the most skeptical among them. The year is 1228. The waves of the Rimini Sea gently crash against the shore, reflecting the golden light of a day that will be forever remembered. St. Anthony stands there preaching to a crowd, but his audience seems uninterested. Some laugh, others merely watch with skepticism, refusing to listen to his words. Perceiving the disdain and disbelief of those people, Anthony makes an unusual decision. He turns to the sea and with a firm and serene voice begins preaching to the fish. Something unexpected happens. The waters stir gently, and entire schools of fish emerge, seemingly captivated by his voice. The fish, attentive and lined up like devout listeners, appear to hear every word. The people, astonished, witness the miracle and are filled with wonder. This event transforms skeptics into believers, and the fame of the miracle crosses borders, fueling faith and hope in times of doubt. From that day on, St. Anthony's presence carried an even more powerful aura. Not only did human crowds seek his words, but even nature seemed to yield to the divine touch emanating from him. It was then that an even more intimate and sacred miracle unfolded. In 1229, in a silent convent, while St. Anthony was praying alone, a celestial light flooded the room, bathing everything in a supernatural purity. Before him appeared the Christ child, who embraced him with divine love. The room was filled with an indescribable peace. Unknown to Anthony, one of the brothers in the convent, passing nearby and peeking discreetly through the slightly ajar door, witnessed the miracle. He watched in reverence, and though he made no noise, he felt himself a witness to something profoundly sacred. The account of this moment spread throughout the convent, intensifying the aura of holiness surrounding Anthony. Meanwhile, the Franciscan order grew rapidly under Anthony's leadership and vision. From 1227 to 1230, he worked tirelessly to establish convents and schools, creating centers of learning that shaped entire communities. In towns and villages, the order became a powerful movement, not only spiritual but also cultural. Anthony's impact extended beyond preaching. He built something enduring, touching the lives of the simplest people, giving them education and dignity. And even as the order expanded, St. Anthony did not stop. Reports of his prophetic gifts and miraculous healings spread like wildfire. Some claimed he foresaw disasters, warned kings and nobles, and prevented impending tragedies. Others spoke of blind people who regained their sight, paralytics who rose from their beds at his touch or the sound of his prayer. Each account was a testimony that increased admiration and wonder, solidifying his image as a direct channel of divine intervention. From 1227 to 1231, his role as a peacemaker and counselor became crucial. The era was marked by political conflicts and bitter family disputes, but Anthony, with his serenity and wisdom, emerged as a mediator. He moved between leaders, nobles, and the common people, resolving quarrels that seemed unsolvable. With simple words, he won hearts, restored peace, and became a figure of trust in uncertain times. By this point, his fame had reached its peak. Thousands sought to see him, hear his voice, and feel his presence. It wasn't just because of what he did, but because of what he represented, a living hope. And amidst this growing devotion, the most astounding miracle took place. A young man, already declared dead, was brought to the saint. With the parents' grief still so raw, their loss so vivid, Anthony knelt beside the body, prayed fervently, and then, with a miraculous touch, the young man came back to life. A cry of astonishment and relief erupted from those present. That moment consecrated faith in the impossible. As the years passed, the vitality of Saint Anthony began to fade. The body, which until then seemed indomitable, now succumbed to an illness that weakened him. In the final years of his life, he experienced the human fragility he had long avoided contemplating. Pain and exhaustion became his constant companions. However, his determination to continue his mission never wavered. He kept preaching, healing, and inspiring, even when he could barely rise from his bed. His unwavering faith became even more evident, serving as an example of dedication, not only through his deeds, but also in how he faced his physical limitations. Every step he took was an act of surrender, every word a reflection of the divine, even when his own shoulders seemed incapable of bearing the weight. In 1231, already debilitated by illness, Saint Anthony decided to retreat to Campo San Piero, a quiet village in the countryside of Padua. The spring brought temporary relief to his weakened body, but also offered a space for reflection. The serenity of the place allowed him to reconnect with his spirituality, preparing himself for the end of his earthly journey. In this retreat, he dedicated himself even more to prayer, meditation, and spiritual preparation for the great transition he knew was coming. He was aware that his mission was nearing its conclusion, yet his spirit remained unshaken, at peace. His heart carried not lament, but gratitude for the work accomplished. He felt the great task entrusted to him by God had been fulfilled, bringing him profound tranquility. It was in this environment of introspection and prayer that in June 1231, Saint Anthony dictated what would become the Liber Miraculorum. This book, which documents the miracles of his life, is more than just a record. It is a reflection on the divine power manifested through his actions. Each miracle recorded within is not simply an extraordinary event, but a living lesson of faith, love, and compassion. The book reveals how everything in his ministry was touched by God, from the lives he healed to the hearts moved by his words. His legacy was not just about the miracles themselves, but the way he lived in complete devotion and service to others. On June 13, 1231, Saint Anthony departed this world as if completing a perfect cycle. He passed away at the age of 36, a short life, but extraordinarily full. News of his death spread quickly, and a deep sense of loss gripped his followers. Yet, at the same time, an inexplicable peace filled their hearts. The serenity with which he embraced death was not seen as a farewell, but as a transition into eternity. Saint Anthony's canonization was swift, as if the Church had always known, from the first day after his passing, that he was a saint. Less than a year later, on May 30th, 1232, Pope Gregory IX officially declared him a saint. The speed of this recognition reflected his universal holiness and the profound impact he had on those around him in both life and death. There was no doubt Saint Anthony was, in the eyes of all, a true intercessor of God. After Saint Anthony's death in 1231, his influence did not diminish. In fact, his departure from the earthly realm marked the beginning of an even grander journey, one rooted in the hearts and souls of the faithful. The construction of the magnificent Basilica of Saint Anthony, begun in 1232 in Padua, was one of the first testaments to this growing popular devotion. This construction was not merely physical, it symbolized the solidity of a veneration that would, over the centuries, grow into a universal phenomenon. Since his death, he has become one of the most venerated saints in Christendom, proclaimed the patron of various causes, protector of the poor, travelers, marriages, and even lost children. The simple mention of Saint Anthony's name evokes deep confidence that he will intercede with compassion for those in need. His influence extended far beyond Padua and Italy's borders. Churches, cities, and schools around the world came to bear his name, perpetuating his memory. His legacy shines not only in popular devotion, but also in theological and academic circles. In 1946, Pope Pius XIII recognized his immense contribution to the Christian faith by declaring him a Doctor of the Church, an honor bestowed upon very few saints, cementing his importance as a model of Christian life. St. Anthony's legacy, marked by his deep devotion and immense compassion, not only inspired those around him, but also left a lasting imprint within the Franciscan order. His connection to St. Francis of Assisi, the order's founder, is evident. As a fervent follower of St. Francis, St. Anthony shared and spread the Franciscan charisma of humility, poverty, and love for the most needy, faithfully walking in Francis's footsteps. Yet the story of St. Francis is itself an extraordinary journey of faith, filled with challenges, conversions, and miracles. He was without a doubt the flame that ignited the Franciscan spirit. In the video now appearing on your screen, you'll discover how St. Francis of Assisi, with nothing more than a dream to serve the poorest of the poor, dared to do something so audacious that even the Pope was shocked to his core. I'll see you there.